So now I'm going to move on to how to beat the tough games. Most of the time, these are going to be tournaments, to be honest, because if you're sitting in a really tough game like this, in a cash game, look for a better game, first of all. But if you don't really have a choice, or maybe you're playing online a lot, like 1-2, 2-4, No Limit Online, and the games are just hard, and you're kind of a little bit confused on how to beat these games, here's a couple hints, couple pointers to help you out a little bit. Limp raising and getting heads up against a tough opponent works a lot better than you think, especially if you're limping in a earlier position. I would stay away from limping cutoff or button and limp raising. It just doesn't look as strong. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you're limping, under the gun +1, under the gun, and someone tries to isolate you, and you have a hand like pocket 4s, pocket 3s, pocket 5s, don't call out a position, just limp raise it. A good opponent's gonna be putting you on a much stronger range. They're not gonna just c-bet you automatically. You're gonna be putting yourself in a lot better spot to pick up the pot. You don't have to hit a set to win. It's just there's a lot of good things to when you limp raise, as long as it's a heads up pot, in spots like that. If it's against an aggressive, smarter opponent in those kind of spots. So I'm gonna go into leveling a little bit with 3 and 4 betting. So when the leveling starts, generally you want to look at the more aggressive, smarter player who is either 3 betting or isolating. And what you want to do is you want to understand what they're doing. So if there's a bad player at the table and he's limping a lot, and you have the guy who has position on him, who's a smarter, more aggressive player, and he's picking on that guy a lot. He's raising. He's trying to get heads up in position with more money in the pot, because that's a phenomenal strategy. It's a great play. But what do we do as a leveling thinking player here? Let's say we're in the blind, small blind or big blind. The bad player limps in the cutoff. The smart, decent player raises to isolate, get in position, and play a bigger pot heads up against a bad player. And we're sitting in the blinds with whatever hand. I don't care what we have. We could have queen 3 offsuit. These can be really good spots to 3-bet or even 4-bet sometimes, as long as you're leveling properly and you understand where the other guy's coming from, and as long as your image is still okay. You don't want to be doing this if your image is just crazy aggressive and super gamble heavy. But if you're playing a general tag style, your win rate will go way up if you take advantage of these spots. I promise you that. Another thing that'll go into is floating flops out of position and in position against aggressive, decent opponents. This is something you need to do to represent real hands. Like dry boards, ace high boards, king high boards with no flush draws, queen deuce deuce, just a lot of boards like that where it's really dry, 9-9-7. As long as there's not a lot of draws and there's not a huge chance that they hit that board, you can be calling out a position with literally air and then bluffing later streets, or calling in position with air. So what happens against a better aggressive player is if you're raising these boards for bluffing, they're gonna end up picking you off. They're gonna call with nothing a lot and float you. They're gonna 3-bet you, and you're gonna be put in a really hard spot. It's like against a good thinking player, what are you really supposed to have if he raises the button, you call in the blinds, the flop comes ace deuce deuce, you check, he bets, you think he has nothing, so you raise. What's he supposed to put you on? Ace king or a deuce, or ace queen maybe? It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The leveling happens there, and you're gonna put yourself in a lot of bad spots where if you float out of position and say you called with jack high there, you can actually represent an ace a lot of the time. And I don't recommend getting fancy almost ever against bad players that are just willing to call with anything, but you can get fancy against the better, more aggressive players, and you actually need to pick up some pots. I recommend don't calling out a position almost ever in these harder aggressive games, unless you have like really good showdown value where you can call 2 streets or 3 streets regardless. I recommend at least ace high. Even calling out a position with like king 10 suited can be really hard sometimes, just because your showdown value isn't there unless you hit. So that's something that you want to be looking for if you are calling out a position. Pocket pairs pre, ace highs, or at least really strong drawing hands. Otherwise you're gonna get barreled off way too often if you're not willing to check raise a lot. Never bet or check raise flops that you can't represent. That's what I went into with the whole leveling thing with you guys. Make sure that every time you're betting, it makes sense for you to have that hand against a good player. If someone makes a move against me that doesn't make sense and I think it through, I become a really big calling station. I'm not gonna lie. If the hand doesn't make sense, I become a calling station as a decent good player. So most other good players do as well. Most of the time it can be curiosity, because it's like, that doesn't make any sense. I have a decent enough hand to call here. So make sure you're careful with your bluffs, and when you do make bluffs, check raises, calls, whatever, you can represent what's out there. And calling against a good player will represent a real hand a lot more often than raising. That's a really big tip and hint right there, and a lot of people don't understand that, and they don't implement it in their game. But calling with nothing actually shows a lot more strength than raising with nothing against a good aggressive game. Implement these styles and strategies into your game properly, as so, like I said, only against tough, more aggressive opponents. Implement the things I just talked about, and for the more splashy, aggressive games, implement those styles and strategies in those games. Remember to keep adjusting. That's why we're here. We're strategic adjustments to fix your game depending on your opponents or the game that you're playing in. These are really important things. Always be looking at ways to improve. Keep watching the videos. We're here to give you value, help you out. I hope you enjoy the little battleship or cruiser or whatever we got in the background here. It's really cool. We got to get out of the heat. I'm dying right now. Make sure you all comment, like, subscribe below. Glad to all have you once again. Take care. We're gonna head to Coushatta in Kinder, actually. So we'll see you all there for a video. See you next time.